Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's the CD guy, Johnny Z here. Thank you so much for tuning back into the channel, and today, as you can see, we're doing another tier list video here, this time examining the most recent albums from 30 legendary classic metal bands. Do these bands still have it? Well, you can see here we have the S tier, the A tier, B, C, D, and F tier, so I will be rating these albums accordingly. So that being said, let's get started. Kicking things off here with Invincible Shield by Judas Priest from 2024. This is, in my opinion, the best Judas Priest album since Angel of Retribution from 2005. That, of course, the reunion with Rob Halford. So, some great stuff on here. Priest sound youthful. They sound revitalized. Rob Halford sounds the best he has in years, in my opinion. You know, Richie Faulkner does some fantastic guitar work on here. Not sure how much work Glenn Tipton was able to do on this record, but if this was the guitar duo of Andy Sneap and Richie Faulkner, they did a fantastic job. Love standouts on here like Panic Attack, The Serpent and the King, which in my opinion is the best Priest song since the Halford reunion. Also on here you have Devil in Disguise, the title track, Gates of Hell, Crown of Horns, As God Is My Witness, Giants in the Sky as well. I saw Priest twice in support of this record. Fantastic stuff. And the songs they've done live, from this album have translated really well to a live setting. So for me, I'm going to go ahead and put this all the way up in the S tier. Starting off strong in the S tier, let's keep things going with Metallica and 72 Seasons from 2023. I know a lot of people did not like this album. A lot of people write off modern-day Metallica. Personally, I'm biased. They're my second favorite band of all time, as you probably know by now. But, I really enjoy every era of the band, and I know a lot of people will say, well, they haven't done anything great since Justice, so they fell off after this album. I like the fact that I'm able to go back and kind of unbiasedly look at every era of the band and not have loyalty to one particular era, but I will say I think this is their best album since Load from 1996. And what I really enjoy about this album is that it seems to pull from every era of the band. You've got your thrashy songs on here. You've got some of your longer, more experimental tracks on here. There's elements of, southern rock, some bluesiness on this record as well. Riffs that you could really say this would fit in this era of the band, and this would fit in that era of the band. So I do think that it touches on a little bit of every album on this record, so that's kind of cool. And if you open it up, there's some intense close-up shots of, all the band members, right? You have James, you have Lars, you have Rob. Then you just have Kirk, who looks like he's crying, and I don't know why. But, maybe he lost his phone again with more riffs and solos for this album. I'm not sure, but I don't know why he's crying. This is an A-tier record for me. Some great stuff, and, way better than I had expected from Metallica. I think, just like the case with a lot of their more modern-day records, you could trim some fat off this record for sure. But some standouts for me include the title track, 72 Seasons, If Darkness Had a Sun, Inamorata, which is just fantastic stuff. Very Outlaw Torn-esque, I think. Chasing Light is fantastic too. So some great stuff here by modern-day Metallica, who I know get a bad rap, but personally, I really enjoy their more recent stuff. So, yeah, A tier for 72 Seasons. We're going to stay in 2023 here and go with Chaos Horrific by Cannibal Corpse, the death metal legends, their most recent album here. And, this is the best produced Cannibal Corpse record in a very long time. I would say the best produced Cannibal Corpse album since Kill in 2006, as far as I'm concerned. Of course, you have Corpse Grinder Fisher. He sounds great on here, and the riffs on this album are super intense. You've got some fantastic drumming as well by Paul Mazurkiewicz, really the unsung MVP of Cannibal Corpse. Very underrated in the annals of death metal, in my opinion. But, some great stuff here by Cannibal Corpse. You kind of know what to expect from them at this point. They're not exactly reinventing the wheel, and what I love a lot about modern death metal is bands who are just kind of, doing their own thing and not trying to copy legends like Cannibal Corpse, but, they've more than earned the right at this point to do whatever they want, and if whatever they want is to stay by a tried and true formula, then that's fine by me. This is one of the better records I would say they've released over the last several years. I'm going to put this one with Metallica in the A tier. The End So Far by Slipknot from 2022. What was it the end of? Well, we know they're still around, but this was their final album with Roadrunner Records, also their final with Jay Weinberg, and, I know that this album was polarizing for a lot of people as well. Slipknot in general are a polarizing band, but I really enjoyed some of the experimentation on here that I was not expecting, especially on tracks like Adderall and Finale. I thought that was really cool. Immediately on this record, you're hit with, this kind of swampy, murky vibe on Adderall that you're not expecting at all. Very different from anything Slipknot had done to this point. We still have not heard Look Outside Your Window. That'll be released on Record Store Day, but as of right now, that's probably the most experimental and different Slipknot song in their catalog. But as jarring as it was at first, I really enjoy it, and the band's kind of stepping outside of their comfort zone here. But you have other tracks that are, all hallmarks of classic Slipknot, right? The Dying Song, Time to Sing, the Chapeltown Rag, Hive Mind, Yen, some really good stuff on here, in my opinion. Corey Taylor sounds fantastic, and in general, I'm not really sure where the band go next, nor am I sure where this really rank within the entire catalog of Slipknot. They in general don't have too many poor records as far as I'm concerned. They pretty much all range from good to great, so I'm gonna go ahead and put this at the B tier. I think that's fair. It's not their best work, but it's got some cool experimentation that I really dig, and can't wait to hear how they follow it up, if they double down on some of the experimentation we hear on Adderall or Finale, stuff like that, or if they, make just a totally, heavier record with Eli Casagrande in the band. So that should be interesting, but yeah, the end so far, really dug it when it came out. Right now, I'm going to put it at a B tier. Next up, Rock Believer by the Scorpions from 2022. In my opinion, their best record since Crazy World, all the way back in 1990, and, in between that 30-year period there, I'm not a big fan of the stuff they did. They experimented a bit. They tried to darken up their sound for the mid-90s as well. But what I want to hear from the Scorpions more than anything else is just, a classic by-the-book Scorpions record. And this definitely wouldn't sound out of place in between, one of the albums in their classic run in the 80s here. So it's great to have old-school Scorpions back. I think the addition of Mikkey Dee on the drums definitely gave the band a bit of a shot in the arm here. So there's an energy and a youthfulness on this record that's infectious for sure. The band's sound revitalized, and I love tracks on here like Gas in the Tank. It's a really powerful opener. Roots in My Boots is fun. Knock 'em Dead, Rock Believer, Shining of Your Soul, Seventh Son, great kind of, classic Scorpions ballad on here. Hot and Cold, Peacemaker, Call of the Wild, When You Know Where You Come From. So really, really enjoy this record here. Saw them on this tour, thought it was great. Scorpions still touring. They've been around now for, almost 60 years. It's fantastic. But some great stuff here by the band so late in their catalog. So where am I going to put this album here? This definitely far exceeded my expectations, especially since the last few Scorpions albums have ranged from, not so remarkable to just kind of good, aside from a handful of tracks here and there. So this one definitely blew me away. Gonna go ahead and put this one all the way up in the A tier. Sticking with German metal here, we have Accept and their most recent album, Humanoid, from 2024. This was an album that I feel like I was much more into when it first came out. I haven't really listened to it all that often since, but I played it the other day in anticipation for this video, and it's still good stuff, but I would not consider this to be, the top tier of the work the band have done with Mark Tornillo since the reunion, in my opinion. Some really good songs on here, some great riffs, of course, right? You have some standouts that include the title track, Frankenstein, Nobody Gets Out Alive, Straight Up Jack, which is just pure AC/DC in my opinion. Really good stuff there, but the rest of this album I think is pretty unremarkable. You have Wolf Hoffman pretty much manning the ship by himself at this point. Peter Baltus no longer in Accept here, but good stuff. Saw this live when Accept toured with KK's Priest. It was a fantastic show. Some of these songs came off a lot better live, I think, but not one of my favorite post-reunion Accept albums, but still a very consistent band, a very solid record nonetheless. Gonna put this one in the B tier. From 2017, Black Laden Crown by Danzig. Danzig's solo catalog after Danzig 4 gets really interesting because there's some really underrated stuff there that's not celebrated the same way the first 4 solo records are, and then there are some records with some really questionable production, but this album really stands out in my opinion as a return to form for Glenn, with a much better sound and production on here than on his, albums that came in the 21st century, right throughout the 2000s. So some really great stuff on here, some great Danzig deep cuts as well. Black Laden Crown, Eyes Ripping Fire, Devil on Highway 9, Last Ride is awesome, But a Nightmare, Skulls and Daisies. Danzig still sounds great on this record here. I'd love for him to make another album. I know he said that, these days in the music industry, it's not really profitable to make another record here, but he wouldn't be opposed to an EP or some singles, which I would love to hear that. But if this is Danzig's final album, I think he ended on a really strong note. Gonna put this one in the B tier. Equals One by Deep Purple here from 2024. The first Deep Purple album since the departure of Steve Morse from the band, and in his place you have Simon McBride on lead guitar, and I think Simon brings a heavier kind of approach and ripple to the Deep Purple sound, and so this definitely was the heaviest Deep Purple album in a long time, but the band adapted to that really well. Ian Gillan's vocals sound a lot richer and fuller on this record, probably the best he sounded in years, and of course Bob Ezrin's production is immaculate on this album, and the band have really found a winning formula since working with Ezrin, and all of their more modern records have been a lot of fun, and at this point Deep Purple are not exactly reinventing the wheel or doing anything super surprising, but you kind of know what you're going to get from them at this point, just, some really fun bluesy rock and metal, so I dig that quite a bit. There's some proggy elements on here for sure as well, so gonna go ahead and put this one in the B tier. How about an album from earlier this year, self-titled by Megadeth, their final record, and what a really strong album to close out their careers on. What I really enjoy about this record is that, Dave Mustaine seems to pull from every era of the band's career here to make this a pretty full circle album, and you would have moments on here that sound more accessible, almost like they were, pulled right from Cryptic Writings, which is kind of interesting and not something I was expecting, but I think Timo Mansuri is the real MVP of this album. I mean, there's some fantastic guitar parts here on his only Megadeth record that really sound a lot like Marty Friedman. Some great soloing going on here from Timo, so great job all around. Lyrically, Dave Mustaine, it was never his strong suit, and he's written some better stuff lyrically, but I think, the songs that, work, really work, and there are some that miss, but I think, standouts on here, like Tipping Point, I Don't Care, it's got kind of a fun punk energy. Let There Be Shred, Puppet Parade, let's see here, I Am War, The Last Note especially, are fantastic. Yeah, you got that cover of Ride the Lightning, which I kind of made a bigger deal out of that than it ended up being. It's okay, but just kind of sounds weird, to be honest. But in general here, I'm going to give this one an A, going to put it in the A tier, the final Megadeth album, and they went out with a banger. Well, we've been pretty positive so far, but unfortunately that's going to come to an end here with Unatoned by Machine Head. Now, I've talked a lot about why I'm not a fan of modern Machine Head before, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this record here, but it just seems like every album Machine Head have released recently has been a dip in quality. It does not feel like Rob Flynn cares anymore. He just kind of seems to be going through the motions, doing whatever he wants, which of course, he's entitled to, but the albums that he's making at this point are, pretty subpar, especially compared to, their classic work, like an album like Burn My Eyes, for example. And maybe it's not fair to compare, a band's most recent stuff to, arguably their best album here, but I think it just goes to show how far, Flynn has fallen in terms of his ambition and his songwriting here. Now, the harmonies on this album are really interesting, but otherwise, it's a pretty bland, boring, repetitive record. The riffs fail to interest me, and his, harsh vocals are pretty destroyed by this point as well. Really underwhelmed by those recent Machine Head records, so I'm going to put this one in the D tier. From bad to worse here with Extinction Level Event by Dark Angel. After over 30 years away, Gene Hoglan got the band back together, and they did this. And I never want to hear this album again, to be honest. It's so unmemorable, it's so bland, the production feels really cheap, the vocals are not good, the riffs are not memorable whatsoever. Everything about this album just feels like a throwaway record. There's nothing that stands out and makes me want to re-listen to it. Songs on here feel like they were rushed, and even Gene Hoglan's drumming, it does not feel up to par considering his standards. This was just a mess of an album all around, and a real shame for people who have been waiting for New Dark Angel for a lot longer than I have, but, even if I feel just a sliver of your disappointment, in terms of waiting for this record here, it was really a disappointment for me, my worst album of last year, so we're going to put this one in the dreaded F tier. I think it deserves it, a terrible album, and so hopefully they make another album to follow it up and are able to redeem themselves. Next, we have another album here from this year, Goliath by Exodus. I reviewed this a few weeks ago here on the channel when it came out. This one got a very mixed response from a lot of people. I initially praised it. I thought it was really interesting experimentation on here, but not all of it worked. I think the addition of Rob Dukes rejoining the band here kind of disrupted the flow they had going on with Zetro Souza, but nonetheless, I'm a fan of what they did with Dukes previously. So it was interesting to have him back in the band. I think he sounds fine on a lot of these tracks here, but, the riffs, I think, are really good. Some solos are solid. However, a lot of these songs tend to experiment and take the band out of their comfort zone, and sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. I think in general, this album feels very underwhelming. I think in a lot of different places here, it doesn't quite know what it wants to be. The band is kind of throwing a lot of stuff at the wall and see what would stick here. So, while I enjoy some of Gary Holt's riffs, and I think that bringing Dukes back into the fold was an interesting choice, and one that initially had me very excited for what they were going to come up with, the end result here was pretty disappointing, even though I don't mind this album, and I've given it several listens and many tries. It's not a record that would rank high on my list of Exodus studio albums. Definitely the most experimental since Force of Habit, but the difference is I actually really enjoy Force of Habit. Gonna put this one in the C tier. Not quite sure where this is gonna rank, on my year-end lists by the end of 2026. I don't foresee this making it on my list of the best metal albums of the year. Maybe on something a little bit more specific, like the best thrash albums of the year, but even that at this point is a stretch. I think C tier is fair. Well, we're still waiting for that new King Diamond album and Merciful Fate record. I guess any year now. But anyway, till then, at least we have Give Me Your Soul, Please, to hold us over from 2007. The most recent King Diamond album. What a long gap it's been in between records here. And at this point, I'm done waiting. If the album comes out, it comes out. But, nonetheless here, with 2007's Give Me Your Soul, Please, this was definitely the best produced King Diamond album. It kind of sounded a bit more contemporary, in my opinion, which is interesting. But, some good stuff on here nonetheless, right? Some standouts in particular, right? You have Never Ending Hill. That's a great track, one of my favorites from 21st Century King Diamond. And unfortunately, we haven't had a large sample size of 21st Century King Diamond, right? He hasn't made an album since 07. But some strong stuff on here for sure. Is it his most memorable album? No, but a cool concept nonetheless. The King sounds great. All the hallmarks here of your typical King Diamond release, so I'm going to give this one a B. Coming up next, we have Senjutsu by Iron Maiden, my favorite band, and their most recent album. And listen, I love Senjutsu. I really do. I love tracks on here like Hell on Earth. The Parchment is great. The title track is an awesome way to set the mood for the record. Then all that tension spills over Interstitigo. I think Writing on the Wall is fine. Fun live song. Definitely overplayed at this point. So there's some really good stuff on here. Darkest Hour, fantastic as well. Death of the Celts, even though it's kind of like the Klansman 2.0, really good. A lot of great musical maturity on here by Maiden as they continue their journey towards a much more progressive sound over their last handful of records. And I really enjoy proggy Maiden. I know some people, miss kind of the, hard-hitting traditional Maiden, right, in line with what they did back in the 80s or even, those first couple of post-reunion albums. But for me, this is the era of Iron Maiden that I grew up with, so I'm biased, I'm partial to this era. I enjoy it, but really I love all eras of Iron Maiden here. The reason this is not an S-tier record is because of the production. Is it Kevin Shirley's fault? Is it Steve Harris's fault? You can't put all the blame on Kevin Shirley because at the end of the day, Steve Harris makes, the final decisions. But the production on here sounds muddy at times. Bruce Dickinson sounds like he, recorded his vocals in another room, and so he's drowned out in the mix is what it sounds like. Then there are some other aspects of this record where things sound really good. Nico's drums sound fantastic as well. Some great guitar solos on here that really shine in the mix too, so it's a mixed bag in terms of production, so that's what keeps it from the S tier, but I am going to put this in the A tier. I think it's some really solid stuff. Not quite as good as Book of Souls, although that album has a special place in my heart, but Senjutsu, nonetheless, solid stuff. I was very into this when it came out, still very into this album here, so I think the A tier is fair. If only they worked with, a different producer next time, but at the end of the day, Steve Harris is going to do whatever he wants. Hopium for the Masses by Ministry. Modern day Ministry. It's so predictable and repetitive, and he goes with Al Jorgensen, he goes for that abrasive sound, and it just to me sounds very sloppy as far as I'm concerned. Al Jorgensen's best work is long behind him at this point, and I'd love to be proven wrong. I love for that last Ministry album, although, we've done this before, last Ministry album, but he's apparently working on one more record. I love for that to be his best album in years, and really end end the catalog on a high note, but I have very low expectations, especially coming off of this record here, which just, it's not memorable at all. One song after another here, it just becomes a tiring listen as far as I'm concerned, and saw Al live with Ministry on a bill with Alice Cooper and Rob Zombie, and he played some of the new stuff live. He was lip-syncing the whole thing, miming to a tape. It was very obvious, and so that just only further deflated my excitement for this record and for modern-day Ministry in general here. I was going to say modern-day Misery. It is Misery, honestly. This album is terrible. I'm going to give this one a D. Next up, we have Patient Number 9 by Ozzy Osbourne. His final record here from 2022 before his passing last year. And, you know, a lot of people do not like modern-day Ozzy. They feel like it's very cookie-cutter, very formulaic, and, yeah, you know, they follow a tried-and-true formula for Ozzy, you know, all the way up to his last album. But I think it works, and I think there's a lot of really good stuff on those last few Ozzy records, really everything from Black Rain on, that deserves to be re-examined and given another chance. Personally, I really enjoy that stuff, and Patient Number 9 was a very strong offering as far as I'm concerned. You know, you have some really great collaborations on here. Jeff Beck, you know, some of his final recordings before his passing, working with Ozzy on Patient Number 9. Mike McCready of Pearl Jam on Immortal. Zakk Wylde all over this record as well. No Escape From Now and Degradation Rules featuring Tony Iommi. The final time Ozzy and Iommi would record in the studio together. Mr. Darkness, which reminds me very much of kind of a Diary of a Madman-esque track, so I love that. One of my favorite modern Ozzy songs there. Evil Shuffle, you know, Dead and Gone, God Only Knows, Dark Side Blues. Nothing Feels Right is super atmospheric, so I really enjoy it here for what it is, and I think now that Ozzy's unfortunately left us, you know, I think his more recent albums are going to tend to be looked at, you know, kind of with, you know, much friendlier ears going forward, and I think that they're definitely worth another chance here, and, you know, it just goes to show that we can't take these guys for granted while they're here, because when they're gone, there's no one coming to replace them, and so Ozzy with this final record here, very glad I got to, you know, experience and enjoy, you know, just the tail end of Ozzy's career, you know, and so for me, I love those more recent albums, Patient Number 9 included. Is it top shelf Ozzy? Probably not, but solid nonetheless. Going to put it in the B tier. Digital Noise Alliance by Queensryche from 2022. I've been loving the Todd La Torre era of Queensryche. You know, Digital Noise Alliance is, you know, another chapter in kind of their revitalization and kind of their, I would almost say, you know, career renaissance post Jeff Tate here, where they're finally finding that revitalization once again and that energy that they just did not have on those, you know, 21st century Tate albums where they were just going through the motions, they were treading water, you know, ideas were getting less and less interesting as Jeff Tate maintained a real stranglehold on the band, but this feels like a much more band effort, and a lot of the La Torre albums feel like that as well. I really enjoy that, and just the idea that, you know, there are multiple contributors now, ideas are flowing more freely, and it definitely reflects that on the tracks on this record here. In Extremis, Chapters, Lost in Sorrow, you know, Behind the Walls, Nocturnal Light, Out of the Black, Forest, probably my favorite song on here. Todd La Torre sounds fantastic. This album goes back to kind of Queensryche's more proggy roots as well, which I really enjoy, and that's been one of my favorite aspects as well of the La Torre era here. So for me, let's put this one at a solid B. We have Repentless by Slayer up next. Now, you know, here's the thing with Repentless. I enjoy it. I really do. You know, I don't think Slayer have a bad album per se, although I'm not a fan of Undisputed Attitude. But when it comes to original material, I don't think they have a bad record. Repentless, however, feels like paint by numbers Slayer. It's very predictable. It doesn't take any chances in the studio, and, you know, it's not that memorable. I think losing Jeff Hanneman, obviously, there's nothing they can do about that, but that was a big blow to their songwriting. Nothing against Gary Holt. He did a fine job filling in, and still does when, you know, Slayer played the sporadic show here and there. But in terms of the songwriting, you let Kerry King take over here with more of his I Hate Everything lyrics, and it just gets really watered down and predictable and repetitive. And so Repentless, I think, is the weakest album in their catalog, not counting Undisputed Attitude. And I'm actually one of the people who enjoys Diabolus in Musica, so I would not put that dead last. I actually think that's, you know, a little bit more creative and interesting than Repentless. You know, there's some solid stuff on here for sure, no denying that, right? I'd love to have another Slayer record, although it would probably follow a similar format to Repentless at this point, and kind of the same, you know, lyrical themes and sounds on Repentless were carried over onto Kerry King's solo project, right, with From Hell I Rise. So a lot of it here reeks of just Kerry having way too much control here and calling the shots, and you don't have Jeff Hanneman to balance him out, but nonetheless, some fine guitar work, some aggressive vocals from Tom Rea. Not terrible, but one of my least favorite Slayer albums for sure, and comparing it to the rest of their catalog, a weak way to end things on, so I'm going to go ahead and put this one in the C tier. 13 by Black Sabbath, the final Sabbath record here. Ozzy, Tony Iommi, and Geezer Butler. Unfortunately, no Bill Ward on this album, but that's a rant for another day, how Bill Ward was treated here. But nonetheless, this album is solid. It's not great. A lot of people do not like it. I enjoy it kind of looking at the lens of Sabbath going back and reminiscing and kind of jamming in the style of their classic albums, paying tribute to their classic sound. I think when you look at it like that, it's a much more enjoyable record. But nothing here really reinvents the wheel. A lot of it is very predictable. Still, you've got some great riffs by Tony Iommi, and it is great to have the guys in the studio one more time. End at the Beginning is a plotting opener, but I do enjoy it. God is Dead is a great song, definitely the best on this record. Loner has the best riff on the album. Zeitgeist is just them trying to redo Planet Caravan, and it's okay, but, it feels like a ripoff. Age of Reason, Live Forever, Damaged Soul, Dear Father. I think side 2 is very forgettable as far as I'm concerned, and, I think definitely what takes away from this album is the lack of Bill Ward, who only could have made this album better. So for me, I'm going to put this one in the C tier. Not a terrible record. I think I enjoy it more than most people who wouldn't have anything kind to say about 13. But yeah, when you look at it, the grand scheme of the Sabbath catalog, it's not classic stuff. It's inspired by the classic stuff, but in the end, it's very much kind of rinse and repeat, copy and paste, kind of, how can we make a traditional Sabbath album one last time? And it does not feel as genuine. 2/3 of the way through here, we have Golgotha by Wasp. Now, I know that, Blackie's been talking about a new record, then that they had to scrap those plans because Blackie said that it had to be on par with the classic material. So, at this rate, I would not hold my breath for a new Wasp record, but it's been going on 11 years now since Golgotha, and this is a very strong record in my opinion. Some real Christian metal undertones on this album here, given Blackie Lawless had just, become a born-again Christian, and that's very interesting. You follow the evolution of his songwriting, that he came to that point. Standouts here include Scream, Last Runaway, Miss You, which was originally written for the Crimson Idol, I believe, which is very interesting to me. Great song, great ballad there. Fallen Under, Eyes of My Maker, and Golgotha to close things out. Doug Blair has a stellar guitar solo on that track. Just great, great stuff. And so this record, kind of in the same vein as some of the more recent Wasp albums, like Babylon or Dominator. I dig it quite a bit, although it's not quite top shelf Wasp. So what I'm going to do is put this in the B tier for now, but still an album I go back to every now and then and always really enjoy it. How about the Mandrake Project by Bruce Dickinson here, his first solo album since Tyranny of Souls. So quite a while, but this was my favorite metal album of 2024. Always going to be biased towards Iron Maiden. Bruce Dickinson is my favorite vocalist of all time. I love his solo stuff too, but this album is a masterpiece in my opinion. I love the thought that went into this record. There's a lot of emotional weight behind Bruce's delivery of his vocals on here. Some great lyrics as well. The whole thing feels very cinematic. It feels dramatic and a little overindulgent, but like in the best way, like in, the classic Bruce Dickinson way that you'd only come to expect from Bruce at this point. His band sounds awesome as well, and it's just meticulously produced on here too. You have Afterglow of Ragnarok, Many Doors to Hell, Rain on the Graves, Resurrection Men, Eternity Has Failed, the original version of If Eternity Should Fail from Book of Souls by Iron Maiden, Mistress of Mercy, Shadow of the Gods, and then Sonata, Immortal Beloved. An epic way to close things out. This album rocks. It's also a bit proggy at times as well. It's really a roller coaster of emotions too, so I enjoy it. I love it to death, as a matter of fact. This is, one of my favorite Bruce Dickinson records. I'd probably put this second or third just behind Chemical Wedding or Accident of Birth. It's fantastic stuff. Bruce's solo stuff is always very underrated. So this one is going to go all the way up into the S tier for me. Hellfire and Damnation by Saxon. When it comes to modern day Saxon, it doesn't get talked about with the same reverence as their classic, essential new wave of British heavy metal stuff from their prime, but still some great stuff done by Saxon more recently. This was a great follow-up to Carpe Diem. Biff Byford still sounds great here too. Some fantastic riffs on this album. You got Brian Tatler from Diamond Head hanging out in the studio here playing with the band, and a lot of these songs have great choruses with stellar guitar work. really enjoy the title track, right? Madame Guillotine is great, probably my favorite song on this whole record. There's Something in Roswell, Fire and Steel is great, The Merchant of Venice, Pirates of the Airwaves, Witches of Salem. So many great modern day Saxon songs on here. It really feels like kind of they've had a creative rebirth over the last several years, and it's great to hear. They're a very consistent band, I think, and a lot of their modern stuff, like I said, very underrated, but even their classic stuff tends to be underrated too. I'm going to go ahead and put this one in the A tier. Awesome stuff, and brilliantly produced by Andy Sneap as well. Well, I talked about Danzig earlier. Now let's talk about the Misfits, specifically their last record, The Devil's Reign from 2011. This from the Jerry Only fronted era of the band. And it's not so much that it's a bad record, but it's not a good Misfits album, if that makes any sense. It feels like a Jerry Only solo project more than anything else. It lacks the memorability or the bite of classic Misfits as far as I'm concerned here. And so it just kind of feels like Jerry trying to hold the whole thing together here, maybe trying to, make an extra buck by calling this the Misfits, even though he's, clearly calling the shots and said this was a solo record by this point. So it's the only, Ministry, only Misfits album I don't own yet. I will pick it up at some point, but I'm really in no rush. Not an album I listen to all that often. And when it comes to the Misfits, there's just so much better stuff from earlier in their catalog that I really have no reason to go back and listen to The Devil's Reign. Jerry Only on lead vocals. He sounds fine, but, he's no Glenn Danzig, so I'm going to put this one in the D tier. Coming up next, we have Dissonance Theory by Coroner. This was my favorite album of 2025. What a return by Coroner, making up for lost time here. This is their first record since Grimm from 1993, and my God, what a statement of a return album this was. Ron Broder still sounds menacing as ever, and Tommy Vetterli on guitars does a tremendous job here. The dude is a beast. He's a virtuoso, and this is the first Coroner record with new drummer Diego Rapicetti, and he does a fantastic job too. Love kind of some of the irregular time signatures and drum beats on here as well, and some of these standout tracks are some of the absolute best in the Coroner catalog. I mean, Sacrificial Lamb might be my favorite Coroner song of all time, to be completely honest with you. Also on here you have Consequence, Crisium Bounce, Symmetry, The Law, Transparent Eye, Trinity is excellent as well, Renewal and Prolonging to close things out. This was produced by Tommy Vetterli and Dennis Ross. The sound on here is great, probably the best produced Coroner record as well. It sounds impeccable as far as I'm concerned, and I've been on a big Coroner kick lately. Honestly, this may be my favorite Coroner album of all time. It's that great, and definitely one of the best comeback albums in metal history, so this one for sure goes all the way up to the S tier. If Dissonance Theory was my favorite album of 2025, then this was my second favorite metal record, Parasomnia by Dream Theater. Awesome record here, great reunion with Mike Portnoy, and I love the Mike Mangini era stuff too, but having Portnoy back in the band was a huge shot in the arm, and, something that I think was long overdue. His creativity back into the fold here, and not just that, but also his drumming. I mean, the dude is second to none when it comes to, really being able to incorporate that, spark that's needed to bring out the best in Dream Theater, and he does that here, and this is the most energized they've sounded in a long time. James LaBrie sounds great here, probably the best he has in quite a while, and you've got some new ideas on here. I really enjoy the Mangini stuff, but a lot of it feels like Dream Theater going through the motions, especially on, the final epic on the albums. This record has some new ideas, especially on the Shadow Man incident, right, the 19-minute closer. It does not feel like kind of the band going through the motions, they're just checking off boxes for an epic, but rather genuinely creative, and, it's a song that does not feel like it's 19 minutes long, so there's a bit of spontaneity brought back to Dream Theater here with this record. Also on here, standouts include Night Terror, A Broken Man, Dead Asleep, which might be my favorite song on this record. Have to re-listen to it again. Midnight Messiah, Are We Dreaming, Bend the Clock, stellar ballad. Nobody does ballads better than Dream Theater. Just great stuff there. And, really wish I could have seen this tour. It bothers me every day that I missed out on seeing them live on this tour, but this is an S-tier album for sure, and I hope in the future, as Dream Theater continue on now, post-reunion with Portnoy, this is the standard from which, all their future albums are kind of, based on. Next, we have Crushers of the World by Creator, released earlier this year. I think Hate Uber Alice took a while to grow on me, although now I really enjoy it. This record clicked with me right away. Just some fantastic stuff here by the band. Very predictable, for sure. You kind of know what you're going to get from Creator at this point. They're not changing things up anymore. They had their experimental period now, but, I really like modern-day Creator, and it's very anthemic, powerful stuff here, right? Some great thrash metal on display. Seven Serpents, Satanic Anarchy, Crushers of the World, Tran and Palast. Great collaboration on that song. Really enjoy it. I think it adds another dimension to Mil Petros's vocals. Also on here, you have Blood of Our Blood, right? You have Loyal to the Grave, which feels very much like, Blood Brothers by Iron Maiden, right? It's that big anthemic fan appreciation track, and I can definitely see that being a live staple going forward. So while Creator aren't doing anything shocking or new at this point, they're still making some very consistent records, and so I'm going to give this one an A. Few more left here. We have Fear Inoculum by Tool from 2020. We're going on another long gap in between Tool records, but it is what it is. At least we have New Pucifer that kind of held us over, right? So that was good from earlier this year. Definitely will be a part of my best albums of the year list at some point, in December. But going back to Fear Inoculum here, this was their first album since 10,000 Days, all the way back in 2006. So Tool making up for lost time on this record here. And some people didn't really love this record. I know it's a bit polarizing. I love it, personally. I love the way that they're able to create such a tense atmosphere and how they're able to just build and build. Stylistically, it's very similar to 10,000 Days, I think, but Maynard James Keenan's vocals are super atmospheric as well. You've got some great drumming on here by Danny Carey, especially on Chocolate Chip Trip. Great stuff there. And just in general, the band are firing on all cylinders here. They, do what they do best, and they've refined it to a T at this point. Some standouts on here for me: Pneuma, Fear Inoculum, Tempest is fantastic as well. And, I saw them live on this tour at Madison Square Garden a couple of years ago. It was my first time seeing Tool, and it was just a fantastic show. I have to admit, I did sneak in a few pictures because, come on, you have to. It's just a fantastic concert, so many great visuals, but, an awesome album that they toured here. The live tracks sounded great, and so for me, I would put this, close to the top if I was ranking Tool albums, but that's pretty impossible considering you're ranking them all from, great to least great, so it's very difficult to rank the Tool discography. I've tried a couple times on the channel and was never quite satisfied with my ranking, but this one's a little bit easier. Going to put this one up in the S tier. Parabellum by Testament from last year, another thrash metal album of the year contender from 2025, and for years I said, how can they possibly follow up Titans of Creation? I mean, that's just, a top 5 Testament album for me. And, I don't think they could have followed it up properly doing just the same thing again, but the adding, of blackened thrash elements here on this record made all the difference in my opinion. It was something I was not expecting at all, but, immediately on For the Love of Pain, you get kind of this blackened vibe to it, and it's great. It feels like a new dimension to the Testament sound. Probably the closest we've had to kind of death metal Testament in a long time, but personally, I'm not a huge fan of Testament going death metal, so I'd much rather kind of akin this record to, say, Low from 1994 instead, where they find that perfect balance. And this is great stuff here. Chuck Billy sounds the best he has in a long time as well. So is it better than Titans of Creation? I'm not really sure, but still, I think it's heavier than Titans of Creation and was a great way to kind of reinvent their sound once again. And that's what I love about modern day Testament, is they're not going through the motions, but rather they're pushing themselves into new territory and improving on each album with every release. So I love that. I'm going to put this one in the A tier. Next, we have the new Neurosis album, An Undying Love for a Burning World, surprise released about a month ago, and I'm so glad Neurosis are back. Fantastic band, and I'm really glad they're able to find new life post Scott Kelly, Aaron Turner in the band. This is his first album on lead vocals, and he is an absolute beast. He does a great job here. This record is super heavy and sludgy with some great riffs, and really feels meticulously crafted here by the band. Production is really solid as well, and some standout tracks, even though it's not a long song, We Are Torn Wide Open is just a total earworm to kind of open things up. And then you have Mirror Deep, great song. First Red Rays, Seething and Scattered, Untethered, Untethered, the 10-minute In the Waiting Hours, and the 16-minute closer, Last Light. This is fantastic stuff. This is the best Neurosis record in obviously quite a long time, but I mean, even, compared to their classic stuff, this is great, great work here by the band. And not to spoil anything, but this may just be the album of the year when all is said and done, so let's put this one up in the S tier. And last but not least, we have The Last Will and Testament by Opeth. The return of the death growls on this record here. Michael Eicherfeld still sounds fantastic in that environment. And what I love about this album here is it takes the death growls that have been absent since Watershed from 2008 and it merges it with some of the cleans as well on here. So you really have a fusion of the best of both worlds, of two different eras of Opeth coming together on this record. And I love that. It's a really cool concept. Eicherfeld is a great lyricist as well. Frederick Okeson does some fantastic work on guitar. Love the collaboration with Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull, who's hanging out in the studio recording some stuff with the band too. And some standouts for me. I mean, Paragraph 1 is great. Paragraph 2, Paragraph 5. You really love A Story Never Told to close things out. Just an emotional closer. Great lyrics on that track as well. So, killer stuff here by Opeth. In my opinion, their best album in a long time. Whether it's in a more prog rock setting or, a heavier progressive metal form with harsh vocals. Michael Eicherfeld really thrives regardless. And this album is a great example of how he can do kind of the best of both. So, let's put this in the S tier. So, that wraps up this video here, taking a look at 30 of the most recent albums from classic metal bands and artists, and you can see we've got a lot in the S tier here, a lot in the A tier as well, not so many down in the D and F tier. It just goes to show that a lot of these bands are still doing great work to this day, which is fantastic to see, and it's great that, they're not all going through the motions, and you're not, throwing in the towel at this point, but rather doing some of the most ambitious work of their careers in the case of a lot of these bands. So I really enjoy that, and I'm glad that they're still here to make music. So I wanted to do this video today to just kind of share my thoughts on, what so many of these great bands are doing later on in their career. Lots of, late career masterpieces here that I wanted to talk about. So I thought I'd do this tier list here today. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel down below. Turn on the bell for notifications so you don't miss a new upload. Follow me on Instagram at the CD Guy JZ, and let me know down in the comment section below what are your thoughts on my ranking and what are some of your favorite modern albums from classic metal bands. I want to hear from you. And until next time, it's the CD Guy, Johnny Z, signing off. Take care, everybody.